Welcome to Sleepy History Tales. Tonight, we will peel back the shining armor of medieval knights and discover why their lives were not as glamorous as stories make them seem. Behind the tales of honor, tournaments, and quests, being a knight often meant pain, debt, danger, and endless duty. So, settle in, take a deep breath, and let us drift slowly into the world of medieval knighthood, a world that may not be as enviable as we think. When you picture a knight, perhaps you see polished armor glinting in the sun, a noble steed charging across a field, or a man bowing before a king. But the reality was far less romantic. Most knights were not wealthy princes or legendary heroes. They were minor nobles, bound by obligation, constantly struggling to balance the demands of their lords with the crushing cost of their profession. The journey began in childhood. To become a knight, a boy was often sent away from home as young as 7. He served first as a page, running errands, cleaning clothes, and tending horses for wealthier nobles. The training was harsh, discipline was strict, and childhood joys were few. Play was replaced by drills, prayers, and endless chores. Already, the life of a knight was more burden than privilege. By his teenage years, the page became a squire. Now the training grew harsher. He learned to fight with wooden swords, to care for armor, and to follow his master into battle. He slept on hard floors, cleaned stables, and risked his life in tournaments not for glory, but because it was expected. One mistake could mean humiliation, injury, or death. Finally, the day of knighthood came, a ceremony with prayers, vows, and sometimes lavish feasts. But beneath the splendor, the knight's burden had just begun. The armor alone was crushing. A full suit could weigh more than 30 kilograms. Imagine carrying that weight under the blazing sun, on horseback, or trudging through mud. Breathing was difficult, vision was limited, and exhaustion came quickly. The costs were staggering. Armor, weapons, horses, all had to be purchased and maintained. A single warhorse could cost as much as a small farm. A knight who wished to appear respectable often went into debt. Many knights were poor, struggling to uphold the image of wealth they did not truly possess. Beneath the shiny surface, their lives were weighed down by financial strain. And then, there was battle. Far from the glory of stories, medieval warfare was brutal, muddy, and terrifying. Knights risked being crushed under their horses, burned by fire, or pierced through gaps in their armor. If captured, they might be ransomed, but if unlucky, they were slaughtered. The reality of combat was not honor, it was chaos, blood, and fear. Even outside of war, knights were bound by duty. Their lords could call them to service at any time, guarding castles, patrolling roads, or enforcing order on peasants. This was not glamorous work. It was long, repetitive, and often thankless. The peasants did not see knights as heroes, but as enforcers of taxes and authority. To many, the knight was a figure of power, not admiration. Tournaments may sound like sport and glory, but they were incredibly dangerous. Jousts could leave men broken, concussed, or killed. Lances shattered against shields, horses crashed into each other, and armor provided only so much protection. Winning meant prizes, but losing could mean lifelong injury. For many knights, tournaments were less about honor and more about desperate attempts to win money. Then there was the code of chivalry, often described as noble and pure. In reality, it was rarely followed. Knights swore to protect the weak, defend the church, and honor women. But most were more concerned with land, wealth, and survival. Chivalry was an ideal, a story told by poets, not the reality of daily life. For peasants facing a knight's sword, there was little romance in the code. Religious wars, such as the Crusades, added yet another burden. Knights were called to travel across seas, to fight in foreign lands for causes they scarcely understood. Many never returned. Those who did were scarred, sick, or impoverished. Once again, the glory told in tales was far removed from the suffering endured by the men themselves. At home, the responsibilities never ended. Knights were expected to manage land, collect rents, and enforce law for their lords. They had to train constantly, maintain equipment, and prepare for the next call to arms. Days were filled, not with feasts and music, but with grueling labor, endless expense, and looming fear of the next war. For all the stories of shining knights, their daily lives were often lonely and harsh. Few could read or write. Many were separated from families for years. They lived under the constant pressure of expectation, expected to be strong, loyal, obedient, and brave at all times. Behind the mask of honor, there was exhaustion, fear, and a longing for peace. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, remember this. Being a knight in the Middle Ages was not the dream of fairy tales. It was a life of burden, debt, and danger, wrapped in steel and shadowed by duty. The stories may shine with glory, but the truth was far heavier. Rest now, knowing that you live in a world where honor is not earned by armor, and survival is not bought with endless war. Sleep well, and let the myths of knights fade into gentle dreams.